I guess it's time to start. Thank you everyone for signing in to come to our last 2022 Home on the Range webinar series. It's been an awesome series this fall, and we have a really great one this lunch to wrap it up. I'd first like to say thank you to the Kamloops Large Animal Clinic for sponsoring this year's series. My name's Ashley Todd. I'm a range agrologist with the Ministry of Forests in Williams Lake, BC, and I'm going to be your host for today. The lunch and learn is going to be 15 to 20 minutes, and then there will be a 10 to 20 minute question period after. If you aren't familiar with Zoom, please make sure that your microphone is muted, and you can use the chat at the bottom to ask questions during the presentation. And if you type them there, I will ask them to the presenter at the end, or you're welcome during the question period to pop on your webcam and ask the questions yourself. Just raise your hand and I'll call on you. This week's presentation is by Nick Hamilton on the province of BC's range ecologists working for ecological and social landscapes in a time of rapid change. Nick Hamilton has lived in several communities in British Columbia, including Dawson Creek, Alexis Creek, Kamloops, 100 Mile House, and Vernon. He has worked for the province of British Columbia's range program for 16 years, including the last 7 years as a rangeland ecologist with the BC Ministry of Forests, based out of Prince George, BC. Nick completed his master's degree at the University of Northern BC with a thesis on the ecology of grasslands and dry forests in the Cariboo-Chilcotin region of BC. Currently, he is working on several monitoring and research projects located in the southern interior and northern British Columbia, including topics on plains bison grazing and prescribed burning boreal and alpine ecosystems, ecosystem recovery after wildfire within the interior of BC, aspen stand dynamics in subboreal forests, and long-term vegetation change in grazing exposures. So with that, I'd love to welcome Nick. Thank you so much for presenting today, Nick, and we look forward to watching your presentation.
Hi, everyone. Hold on a sec. Okay, sorry, it's frozen. There I am. You can see me? Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to, I was asked to present on a particular topic, but I thought that we've been really busy here in Range Branch over the past 4 or 5 or 6 years doing a lot of different work all over the province. And I think a lot of people don't have any idea what we're doing, and we just have our heads down in our work trying to get things done. So I just wanted to do kind of an overview of who we are and what we're doing. So I'll share my screen. So yeah, this is just on the range ecologists in BC.
We can't see your screen yet, Nick.
Oh, shoot. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, so this is just on the range ecologists in BC. And I realize there's other range ecologists who don't work for the province, but I just mean the ones who work for the province of BC. So I don't want to set the idea that we're the only ones, and also there's a lot of people who support us as well, but I just had to draw the line somewhere. Like Nancy Elliott is on the call and she supports a lot of our work as well. So this, and the other thing is I just wanted to just show photos of the different kind of landscapes that we work in. So this is the one in this title is a subalpine grassland in Northeast BC. This is in the boreal zone. So the three of us, it's me, Nick Hamilton. I'm based out of Prince George. There's Eleanor Bassett. She's based out of 100 Mile House. And there's Ian Campbell based out of Kamloops. Those are the three people with range ecologists somewhere in our job title. And in this photo, that's really interesting. That's a bison wallow in alpine grasslands, having to do with one of our projects. So I think traditionally, range ecologists in BC worked a lot on livestock grazing management, which we still do. And a lot of that work kind of, even though it was focused on grazing management, had kind of a broad application across a lot of different fields. For example, if you look at Edwin Tisdale's work from the 40s or 50s, the grasslands of BC, the IDF zone of interior BC, like some of those papers were published in ecology or ecological monographs. I don't think we'll ever hit those hit those marks again, but they had broad appeal. And now we've kind of used that kind of foundation for a long time, but we kind of need a little bit of a refurbishing of our range ecology foundation because there's so many emerging issues in the province right now. So just to go over a few, there's climate change. So that has implications for plant species, geographic ranges, plant community changes, invasive species. Over the past 5 or 10 years, we've had unprecedented wildfires. I mean by that in the area, the severity, the frequency, the effects, which is also linked to climate change and linked to past management practices, where Indigenous reconciliation is one of the top priorities of our ministry. So we're looking for ways that we can engage with Indigenous communities and bring back potentially traditional ways of management. So looking for ways that we can kind of support that. The reintroduction of prescribed burning, which is also linked to all of those things. It's a link to the wildfires, Indigenous reconciliation, and climate change. Unstudied range ecosystems. So a lot of the papers on range in BC, they tend to be in areas located around our major urban centers like Kamloops, Kelowna, and a lot of our ecosystems where we have a lot of range have been underlooked, like say the subboreal, the boreal, the Chilcotin, those. And so we're trying to get out into these different areas and kind of do some foundational work on areas where we don't have a strong foundation yet. There's rewilding and wildlife management. So the reintroduction of bison. We're involved in projects that have consequences for elk management and still livestock grazing management. And you might ask, why would you want range ecologists working on these type of questions? Because a lot of them, they have overlap with a lot of different areas, and there's a lot of different kinds of environmental and natural resource professionals out there. And I think that without range ecologists, you're really missing some important perspectives. And I think we really bring a lot to the table to help solve some of these problems that we're facing or some of the issues that we're facing. So traditionally, we have had a greater focus on vegetation dynamics rather than classification or association. So things like ecosystem health, ecosystem functioning, successional dynamics, effects of grazing. So the other main kind of ecologists in our ministry are the people who work for research branch, and their main kind of piece of work over the past 50 years has been the biogeoclimatic system, which obviously is a really significant piece of work, and everybody, basically all environmental professionals in BC use that. But one thing is that it's really focused on climate vegetation associations or site vegetation associations. So it's really a classification focused system. And I think that what the range people kind of bring to the table that is a lot different than that is our kind of expertise in the vegetation dynamics. We also have a lot of skills. We're really good at measuring vegetation and at a level that we can detect change in vegetation over time, plant-animal interactions. And we have a particular skill set, and I keep thinking when I say this of, you know, the movie with, but anyways, the response of the effects of temperature or grazing or disturbance on a lot of our non-tree species. So we work for the Ministry of Forests, and the focus is on trees because of the forest industry. And we kind of are the knowledge holders in this ministry, and the people who have a lot of expertise and that institutional knowledge, our data sets on the plants that grow under the trees. We work in ecosystems that are closest to communities where there's concerns about effects of wildfire and other disturbances, and managing managing ecosystems to reduce severe disturbances around communities is kind of part of what we've historically done. And we often work in ecosystems that are predicted to be most affected by climate change. So dry forests, grasslands, grassland forest boundaries, those types of places. So in our work, our group, like I worked for, the people who I worked for when I first started out are kind of people who were in the boomer generation, and they were really inspired by the kind of the classic foundation of range management and ecosystems in BC and some of those classic studies. And so I worked with those people in the field, and when we're making observations, we're always referring back to these kind of broad ecosystem-based studies. And so we're looking for ways to renew those studies. And part of what we do and kind of our tradition over time in range is we have this kind of broad ecosystem-based viewpoint where instead of doing work where there's an effect and a response variable, we typically record a lot of different characteristics of the ecosystem and kind of do these broadly kind of descriptive work that's not very common anymore. It's kind of like old school ecology. And so I consider us old school ecologists, but we have new tools like statistical tools that we can do to bring new kind of perspectives to that kind of work. So these are our projects. There's a lot of them. Where we recently did a study on the effects of grazing and grassland plant species composition and soils in the Caribou-Chilcotin. That was published in Plant Ecology in 2022. There's another study on grassland forest boundaries and the effects of wildfire kind of in an ecosystem resilience perspective. That's in a journal and conditionally accepted into a journal. So I'm in the peer review process. We're doing a project on long-term vegetation change in livestock exclosure. So there's a network of exclosures around BC, and some of them are very old, like 80 to 100 years old. And we have long-term data on those exclosures, and we collected vegetation data in all of those very old exclosures, and we're analyzing that data with a climate change perspective. In response to the kind of mega wildfires that have happened in the past couple of years, we've created a network of post-wildfire monitoring plots around southern interior BC. This is meant to be a living project where different organizations or like universities or different people can update this network and apply the same method and revisit the same sites. They're permanent plots. We intend to provide updates on the project, but that's kind of like a living project. We have this other big project in the northeast of BC. We're calling it the Bison and Burning Project right now. And it has to do with the reintroduction of bison into boreal grasslands in the northeast. So this is way up there north of 57 degrees. And we're also studying the effects of prescribed burning in that boreal landscape, and we're a couple of years out from finishing that. In an effort to expand the number of ecosystems we have information on, as I was telling you before, we're doing work on saline grasslands and subboreal aspen ranges, where we're describing plant communities, describing effects of grazing and browsing. And aspen stands, we're going to attempt to do some explanation on aspen regeneration dynamics, because that's been done for the boreal with Richard Kabzim's work, but that hasn't yet been done for the subboreal. So last summer I did a description of a relict aspen parkland grassland. That's in peer review. Eleanor in particular is doing prescribed burning monitoring with the Sket First Nation near Williams Lake. We're doing ongoing forage supply work, and we're supporting our colleagues around the province. That's ongoing. That's with specific management questions and assistance with monitoring and so on. So I just wanted to do just a sample of photos from about the past 2 years of different areas where we've worked and we've collected data. So this is near Tunkwa Lake. It's a IDF severely burned forest, pine grass rough fescue ecosystem. This is a dry fir forest in the Caribou. This is a Altai fescue grassland in the boreal northeast. There's Ponderosa Pine Grassland Association's post-burning. I think this is part of the old Exclosure project. Here we are monitoring grazing and alpine grasslands. This is part of the saline grassland project. You can kind of see the salt crust on the soil surface there. More dry fir burning, more dry fir burning, post-wildfire monitoring in grasslands. Those are all the stems from the big sagebrush that are no longer part of the ecosystem, or not as much anyways. And this is part of our work on aspen stand dynamics, more old exclosures and more aspen stands. So that's just a sample. And sorry, it looks a little rough, but that's, I just did this morning. So that's that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nick. I know, not to put you on the spot, Eleanor, I saw you're here. You had said you could have something you wanted to say. And so if you do have anything you want to say, you are totally welcome to unmute and talk.
Nope, that's great. Great presentation, Nick. Just wanted to be here if there's any other questions as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nick. That was great. And so with that, we'll open the floor to question. Did anybody have any questions for Nick? Feel free to throw on your webcam, unmute your mic, or type them in the chat, and I can ask Nick for you. I had a question, but then you answered it, Nick. And I'm not going to lie to everybody, my brain is not working the best this morning. And so my question coming up with ability has not been the
I can add in, it's Wendy Gardner.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Wendy. Thank you.
Hi, Nick. Great presentation. You guys are doing so much. It's so exciting to see all of the stuff that's happening out of there. And then I look and I see 3 names and I'm like, wow, no wonder you guys are busy. But I know you were talking about that you were trying to do more of like one of those broad level landscape, like the Tisdale, McLean, Marchand work that was really focused in the central interior, and that we're really lacking that type of information about some of our northern plant communities. Are you working on that? Can you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah. So with each of these projects, we're typically measuring full plant community cover. Like we're doing pretty intensive sampling within plots, and we're also typically doing a lot of different plots around a lot of different conditions. And we're measuring soils, and we're also measuring forest stands in some cases, like the canopy. And for example, the Bison and Burning project, which is really a big multi-year project. We're looking at there was a herd of bison that were released in Northeast BC, and which there's now a hunt on. And so there actually used to be bison in Northeast BC, and they were extirpated. So this is kind of like almost like an accidental rewilding project. We're measuring the plant communities that they're grazing. In the past, there was prescribed burning practices to maintain open ecosystems. And so it's kind of tricky, because to get a published paper, you do need a cause and effect, and you do need those p-values. And so we are measuring things that is where there is a question, that you can answer, there's a hypothesis. But at the same time, we're taking a really broad view, and we're adding just a lot of information to that kind of core question. So I'm hoping with our Bison and Burning project, where the real questions are about what are the long-term effects of prescribed burning, and what are the effects of browsing and grazing, they were also going to contribute a lot of information on plant communities and soils in a remote area of BC that's been understudied. So it's all wrapped up in a big ball.
Great. I'm looking forward to seeing that come out. I know it's too bad that those traditional papers that just really, those descriptive papers are so hard to publish now, because I think there's still places where we have a need for those, but it's just not the type of literature that really gets out there in peer-reviewed journals at this point. So
yeah, I've grappled with that, and I know about that. So, but the thing we do really have working for us is that those old studies tended to be completely descriptive, and there might not have even been any statistical analysis. So we have a lot of tools that they didn't have back in the day. And so I think that with a big push, we are able to do it. I'm really crossing my fingers. I have one study that's in peer review where I measured plant communities before and after a wildfire out at Beatrice Prairie. And so that one's almost across the finish line, and that's similarly a really broad study. So yeah, we've got a couple out, but it's kind of like and a few more on the cusp, and then a few more that are kind of will be finished over the next few years.
thanks, Nick.
Nick, I know that before, like outside of this, you had talked about how you really wanted to develop plant community information for the northern part of the province. And I was just curious if you've been doing work on that kind of thing, and if you have any new developments in that. I know it was something that you had said you wanted to do with your research on the exclosures in the north, since we don't really have that kind of plant community information for the northern half of the province.
Yeah, the last really comprehensive study that was done, like in the Peace region, that I know of, I might be missing something, but was Moss way back in the 50s, and he described the aspen parklands of Alberta and the adjacent Peace. And I was made aware of a kind of a relict grassland in the Peace. And one thing to note about about the piece is almost all of the grasslands were affected by cultivation. So there's very few of them left. And I just did a note on that grassland and described the species composition. So hopefully that will be available soon as well. I think, you know, people might wonder, why would you do a study on a type of a grassland that's almost extirpated from, you know, from that region? But a lot of changes happening. Like there was a big court case that occurred up there with regarding Treaty 8 First Nations and the level of impacts that that we've been having on the landscape. And so I think there's going to be kind of a renewed interest in ecosystem restoration. And at the same time, there has been there's climate change, and some of the climate models are projecting that there's going to be expansion of non-forested ecosystems. And so I think that there's value in looking at those kind of remnant grasslands in the piece.
That sounds super interesting, Nick. I'm very much looking forward to reading about that when the study gets published. Does anybody else have any questions for Nick? Well, Nick, I just want to say thank you so much for this awesome and super informative presentation. I know that there's lots of people from like the PNW as a whole, but also lots from British Columbia here. And it's really nice for us to see what the government of BC range ecologists are doing and the projects that you're working on, and some photos kind of what you're doing. It was a really informative and beneficial presentation. And thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. I'd also like to say thank you to everybody for your attendance over the last weeks. Oh, I missed a question. There was a question to the audience from Eleanor. Do you think there are research questions that the range ecologists should be focusing on that they might be missing upcoming issues? And you guys are welcome to type them in the chat, come in and talk, or we can provide Eleanor and Nick and Ian's contact info if you want to reach out and talk to them more about it. Yeah. And Eleanor and Nick, feel free to type your emails into the chat box just in case anybody wants to reach out and talk to you about those things, and come up with any suggestions or that kind of thing. But yeah, thank you so much from the BC SRM for your attendance over the last several weeks. We've had an awesome turnout this year, and it's been really nice seeing all of these different things that people are working on throughout the Pacific Northwest, and the learning opportunities for all of us SRM invested folks throughout the country and PNW. And I hope you guys all got lots out of these lunch and learns, because I sure did. Thank you so much, Nick, for your presentation today.